If you haven't seen part 1, please make sure to check it out, link in the description. It was called part 1, but was mostly a rewrite of the third film. The first 2 Harry Potter films are basically perfect and need no changes. By contrast, the third film has at least one big problem with the massive time turner plot hole. Once you've introduced time machines as common items that can be used to solve central conflicts, you've got a bit of a problem. My solution was to say basically, Peter Pettigrew was a watchmaker who used his incredibly nimble rat hands to make a time turner as a constituent part of a time machine to bring Voldemort back to life. At one point he loses it though, and that's how Hermione ends up finding it and using it to take extra lessons. And since a time turner was only ever successfully built by someone who had skilled knowledge of watchmaking and also was able to turn into a rat in order to do the incredibly complicated operations, we can reasonably conclude that another wizard recreating one is not a realistic solution to problems going forward. That's not the only change I made to Prisoner of Azkaban, but it's the most important one because it completely fixes the biggest issue of the plot. So if part 1 was fixing the third film, now we obviously need to fix the fourth film, so here's my solution. Get rid of it. The Goblet of Fire is the most pointless Harry Potter film. I'm not the first person to say this, so I don't entirely feel the need to defend myself, but very briefly, a normal person shouldn't care whether Harry succeeds in the Triwizard Tournament. For that matter, Harry doesn't even care. So we aren't invested in the plot. In the end, we discover Barty Crouch was secretly working behind the scenes so Harry would win and the cup would transport him to Voldemort. But this is very stupid. It's stupid that you can infiltrate Hogwarts with Polyjuice Potion. Why doesn't every bad guy do that? It's stupid that the staff suspect something is wrong, but let Harry compete anyway because tradition. It's stupid that this tournament for 17-year-olds appears to put them in genuinely life-threatening situations. It's also stupid that Voldemort even thinks this plan will work. Like, sure, they're helping Harry out, but there's only so much you can rig it to ensure he wins. The essential meat of this plot can be cut out entirely, especially since all the good stuff can just be added to other films. For example, since Azkaban is much shorter than the prior 2 films, I just added all the Yule Ball stuff. So I guess we can just skip to the Order of the Phoenix. I'm going to say something really obvious. If you're writing a story, the first thing to consider is what are the main strengths of that story? What is at the heart of that story that powers it like an engine? And I'd submit, in the case of Order of the Phoenix, the first big strength is the magical connection between Harry and Voldemort. That was also my favourite part of the Chamber of Secrets. So obviously we want to really lean into that, keep returning to that connection, make it feel substantial, and explore Harry's work with Snape to counter Voldemort. And this leads us on to what is actually one of my favourite singular moments in any Harry Potter film. One of my favourite moments in any film ever. The moment where we find out that Harry's dad was a bully. Up until that point, we've just assumed that Harry's dad was a fundamentally good person. Why wouldn't we assume that? He obviously took on a heroic role in the fight against Voldemort, but none of that precludes the possibility that maybe on a deeper level, James was kind of a massive jerk. This is everything that a twist should be. It's not something you could see coming, but when you find it out, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it explains why Snape hates Harry so much, even if it is a bit irrational to punish a child for his dad's actions. Harry is very similar to his dad, basically a jock, so maybe James kind of was too, and part of that would have meant being a bully. And the real reason this is a great twist is that it should hit Harry like a bag of bricks. It can't be expressed how much Harry misses his parents, loves them, and has an idealized view of them. The fact that the first time he ever sees his dad at Hogwarts, he's just tormenting another child, would absolutely shatter that worldview. So we need to lean into that more. Fortunately, the film already focuses on the legacy of James quite a bit, and it also focuses on Snape, but I think it should focus on him even more. If our goal is to make this film about Snape, then the Half-Blood Prince plot shouldn't wait for the next film. It's named after Snape, but this really significant Snape scene is in this film. Clearly, it's much more impactful if we bring together these two Snape-centered subplots to create a complete character study. Especially since the Half-Blood Prince thing is kind of weak on its own. It's very derivative of Tom Riddle in Chamber, a book written by someone who it's revealed in a twist was the apparent antagonist all along. We've done this already. So, easy peasy, just smush Half-Blood Prince and Order of the Phoenix together, right? Turns out taking two separate stories and just smushing them together is actually incredibly complicated. Fortunately, since the first two films were 2 hours and 40 minutes, that does give us an extra 20 minutes to play around with here. Still, even if we have the time to fit in all the stuff we want from both these movies, definitely a tight fit, how do you untangle these subplots from their respective movies and weave them into the plot of this new combined film? This is all further complicated by the fact I really hate the central object for the Order of the Phoenix. I believe the technical term is a MacGuffin, the one object central to the plot. Obviously in the first film it's the Philosopher's Stone, in the second film it's Riddle's Diary, in the third film it's the Time Turner, but in the fifth film it's an orb that contains a physical manifestation of a prophecy relating to Voldemort and Harry. I hate everything about this. The entire idea there is a prophecy that I guess predetermines much of the outcome between Harry and Voldemort robs the characters of agency. Also, where did these prophecies even come from? Why are there so many of them? What function does keeping them all together serve? That big room full of prophecies at the end just seems very dumb to me, and ultimately I don't think any of this actually adds to the plot. I'll tell you what's a better object for a final confrontation: the Goblet of Fire as a portkey. Again, that actually works really well as a twist. When they first use a portkey, it's just another method of traveling available, like the many magical methods they've used so far. So you're not really expecting it to be reincorporated until right at the end when Harry and Cedric touch the cup and get transported to Voldemort, and you're like, what? Oh, of course, it was a portkey. It's one of many examples in these films where you just have to point to them and say, this is how you do a twist. You set something up naturally, and then when it's reincorporated later, the audience isn't expecting it. So let's just steal the setup to the Goblet of Fire and insert that in. That works great because this film is about Harry getting visions from Voldemort, and Goblet starts with a vision from Voldemort. Except we actually already used that scene in my rewrite of the third film, so what about we take the scene of Death Eaters attacking Millennium Bridge, showing that Voldemort is preparing to make war against the Muggles. And then the film continues as normal and they head to the portkey, except rather than heading to the Quidditch World Cup, why not just have them be heading to a wizard tournament? Like, since we're not using the Triwizard Tournament for Harry's plot, just have it presented as the Wizard Olympics. Of course, if we're including the Triwizard Cup here, then it can't be the portkey at the end of the film. Except yes it can, because competing in the tournament is one Cedricson Digglesworth, who is entering his last year at Hogwarts. So he wins the competition under entirely legitimate circumstances, no funny business at all. Now go take that trophy to Hogwarts, you big winner. But this still doesn't entirely satisfy me because, well, why would this random trophy be a portkey? Also, shouldn't anyone be transported as soon as they touch it? So let me just explain my innovation that I think solves a lot of problems. The trophy itself has loads of jewels because it's a trophy, and lodged in the trophy is a big blue gem. It is the gem from Ravenclaw's diadem. It is, indeed, a Horcrux. Now, is this a bit derivative? A Horcrux being unwittingly brought into the school is kind of what happened with the diary, but I think this is different enough to be excused. If portkeys can't just be random objects, then it makes sense for it to be something significant to Voldemort, and obviously a Horcrux is significant. Also, there needs to be a reason why Harry in particular would want to touch the portkey, and again, if he thinks it's related to Voldemort, that makes sense. The thing is, if we include the Horcruxes, that would mean including Professor Slughorn. The whole point of Slughorn is that he was the one who taught Voldemort about Horcruxes, so without him, the plot wouldn't work. Which, okay, fine, that's sure. We could imagine that at the tournament, Harry runs into Dumbledore, and Dumbledore has brought Slughorn along to try to butter him up. Just like in the sixth film, Dumbledore could appeal to his ego about the prestige of teaching a great wizard like Harry Potter, and Slughorn would agree to teach potions. The downside here is, what about Umbridge? I mean, Umbridge has a lot of great moments. She's one of the more iconic villains from the series, and it would be a shame to get rid of them. However, we can just save her for the next film, especially since we skipped the fourth film, so it's not actually established that Voldemort is alive, so a lot of her plot around denying that wouldn't make sense. So, for now at least, all the major points are in place. They arrive at Hogwarts, but without the Thestrals, because Harry hasn't seen anyone die yet without Cedric's death. Well, he still saw Quirrell die, unambiguously, so I guess that's a plot hole I'm happy to cut. Then Dumbledore would welcome them all to Hogwarts, but this time introducing different teachers. And after this, we jump right into Slughorn's first potion lesson playing out same as the sixth film. Harry finds an old notebook by someone called the Half-Blood Prince, and the notes are incredibly helpful. There's a few scenes early on in Phoenix where Harry just hangs out in school, so we can include those if time permits, until Harry then receives his assignment from Dumbledore to gain the trust of Slughorn so that he can find out what memories he has of Voldemort.
You said Professor Slughorn will try to collect me.
I did.
Do you want me to let him?
Yes.
After this, I was considering including Ron's Quidditch tryouts, but I'm mindful of the ever-expanding runtime, and also I'm not really sure how I feel about the whole liquid luck thing in general. Isn't it kind of universe-breaking? So maybe that will appear in the next film, we'll worry about it then, especially since now I am going to get real spicy and mess with things. See, while Snape is the main defense against the dark arts teacher, it might make sense for the school to bring in Aurors to teach from their direct experience. And as such, I think we should insert the unforgivable curses scene from Goblet featuring Mad-Eye Moody. Except I don't really think we could have the whole moment with Neville and the Cruciatus Curse, at least not in the same way. Obviously, because in Goblet, Moody is actually Barty Crouch in disguise, there's a much deeper level to him showing Neville the Cruciatus Curse. Barty Crouch is one of the Death Eaters who tortured Neville's parents to the point of insanity with that very curse. However, I don't think there's a way to justify a Death Eater entering Hogwarts with Polyjuice Potion, so this doesn't really work. Indeed, Mad-Eye Moody isn't long for the world, because next we'll introduce Harry's Voldemort dreams early, with Harry dreaming of himself killing off a number of Aurors. He shakes this off as a dream and tries to put it out of his mind as he has dinner with Slughorn. This is in fact a Christmas dinner, because after that it's almost immediately off to the Weasleys to spend Christmas with them. Once there, they can't help but notice Mr. Weasley is missing. Turns out he's been staying later at work for the Ministry because something really big has come up. Molly is evasive about revealing what's happened as if it's something she doesn't want to trouble the children with. However, that night, Harry has to put two and two together as he dreams he is Nagini, the snake, attacking Arthur. He races to inform the family as quickly as possible, insisting they send someone to check on Arthur, and gratifyingly they're able to save his life. As people come to fully realize that Harry has some kind of ability to witness what Voldemort is doing, we're also formally introduced to the Order of the Phoenix as a specific organization that exists to counteract Voldemort. Harry's connection with Voldemort sees him subject to extreme scrutiny, and we see him interrogated by the Ministry, harassed by fellow students at school, and defamed by the media. Now that everyone's back from Christmas break, let's take another brief moment to establish some key changes to the story. See, I'll be honest, I don't really like the Deathly Hallows. Specifically, I find the grouping together of these three objects to be kind of arbitrary and unsatisfying. There's the invisibility cloak, which has always been treated as a fun little gadget from day one, so the idea that it's actually one of these three really important objects with a whole legend centered around it just seems kind of like a sloppy retcon. Then there's the Resurrection Stone, which has the opposite problem of barely playing into the plot at all, except for right at the end to fix one specific challenge. And then you have the Elder Wand, which seems to be the only thing that really matters. Like, Voldemort isn't concerned about picking up the invisibility cloak or the Resurrection Stone, he only wants the Elder Wand. With world building, I like to be thinking, oh wow, not what? And with the Deathly Hallows, I don't really see the point in them. So Hermione comes back from Christmas having been gifted a copy of Beedle the Bard, and one night as she sits reading it, she comes across the specific story of the Deathly Hallows. Now, the first big change is that the invisibility cloak has to go. If one of these objects gets you a third of the way to being the Master of Death, then the idea Harry was walking around with one in first year just makes no sense. So how about instead something described like a suit of armor that makes you invulnerable to attack, so more about invincibility than invisibility. The other two can be the same, an Elder Wand that gives you a lot of attacking power, and a Resurrection Stone that lets you revive people. The third change would be to combine the Deathly Hallows with the Horcruxes, in that Voldemort's fascination with one directly leads on to his fascination with the other. The idea would be that to create a Horcrux means to create your own Deathly Hallow, another way to cheat death. So now we know about the Deathly Hallows as a legendary concept, but there's not much time for late night reading as Harry is summoned to Dumbledore due to how serious it is that he has a connection with Voldemort. Thus he instructs Professor Snape to begin training Harry to defend his mind from mental attack through the art of occlumency, mastering your own mind and potentially the minds of others. After their first session, Snape also informs Harry that thanks to growing paranoia after the attacks on the Aurors, the Ministry is now insisting that the teaching of defense against the dark arts be scaled back. Harry points out this makes no sense. If they're worried about those attacks, they should teach children to defend themselves. Snape doesn't disagree, but he does point out that there's little use Harry learning magic to defend himself in a physical fight when right now he can't even secure his own mind. But we start to see a change in Harry, a growing anger, impatience, and strong-headedness. When it's suggested he starts teaching extracurricular classes as the only one to face Voldemort before, he accepts this role and begins Dumbledore's army. This time his main source for strategy is the Half-Blood Prince notebook, which is filled with all sorts of useful tips and even reveals the location of a secret room that would be a perfect location to meet. We see a montage of them developing the location to be a suitable place for training an army, and at some point Cedric ends up joining and decides he'd like to store the Triwizard Trophy in the room to show what Hogwarts is capable of. Since this film has a lot of Slughorn's plot, it would also have much of the romance drama we see in the sixth film, except instead of Ginny Weasley, Harry would be kissing Cho Chang, and Hermione might be getting friendly with Cedric, much to Ron's annoyance. Remember that scene where Harry is remembering something and then it's revealed that Snape is invading his brain?
Feeling sentimental.
That's private.
I really like the idea of using that scene to transition from Harry kissing Cho to the mind training sessions. So Harry kisses her and then Snape appears behind them like, ugh, I think I might vomit, and then Harry's annoyed at Snape invading his mind. They do more occlumency training, and while Snape does express his belief that Harry's father was a bad person and Harry objects, we leave that thought to marinate briefly for a later lesson. Instead, we pay off on the romance drama with Slughorn's party, but Harry seems less interested in partying and much more interested in continuing to train his army. We get another army scene where this time Harry shows them one of the most powerful spells in the book, although he passes the spell off as his own. He yells out Sectum Sempra, and it's as if a series of throwing knives fly out from his wand, covering a broad range and gouging deep cuts in the entire wall in front of him. Someone cautiously asks Harry whether he thinks they'd really need to learn a spell that powerful and deadly and dark. Harry then meets with Dumbledore, who is largely ignorant of what Harry's been up to, but does finally actually show Harry the incomplete memory that he would like Slughorn to complete. Before Harry leaves, Dumbledore stops him and reminds him to continue focusing on his lessons with Professor Snape. After all, if Harry is able to see what Voldemort is doing, it's quite likely that Voldemort may be able to see things the other way, and perhaps even influence Harry's behaviour. Learning to fight back against this could not be more important. Then we enter the final occlumency lesson. Snape is pushing Harry, while Harry only gets increasingly angry and frustrated, until at one point he snaps and not only resists Snape, but pushes back against him into Snape's memories. It's at this point that we see a typical day for Snape back when he was a young student at Hogwarts, and we see that Snape was relentlessly bullied and traumatized by Harry's father. As the vision ends, Harry looks at Snape with a mix of pity and confusion as he puts everything together. Snape looks back at Harry with anger and embarrassment as he storms off, declaring that he will not continue these lessons. Something you've hopefully noticed is that here I've really leaned into the idea that Harry is growing increasingly angry and controlling and in general kind of evil. We would see this subtly in every aspect of his life. He pursues Cho kind of aggressively and is jealous for her affection. In the way he runs the army, he is less sympathetic to those who are struggling while encouraging more aggression. And after the army breaks up and Harry shoos off Ron and Hermione, wanting to be alone for a moment, he is suddenly overcome with a vision of Sirius Black being tortured. He rushes off, considering how he could possibly find Voldemort to help Sirius, when suddenly he happens to run into Slughorn and realizes now is the time he needs to find out what Slughorn knows. See, the Slughorn plot in the film ultimately feels very silly, because at the start of the movie Harry gets the liquid luck potion, and then the resolution to the whole plot is that he just uses it, and in getting lucky, Slughorn tells him everything. Which should leave you thinking, well, couldn't he have done that right away then? And doesn't that make the whole plot feel kind of pointless? The whole plot is just about trying to find out this information from Slughorn, which is why Harry goes to all this effort ingratiating himself to him. But in the end, that was all pointless because Harry just uses a potion that guarantees whatever he needs to happen will happen, and obviously that fixes everything. I don't like that. I don't like for the whole plot of a movie to feel pointless in hindsight. My resolution to the plot couldn't have happened right at the start. It really couldn't have happened any time before now, because it could only happen once Harry has been subtly influenced by Voldemort for a whole year and is at his most angry and desperate. It could only happen after Harry has just been confronted with the fact that the one person he considered to be his hero, James Potter, was actually a cruel, vindictive bully. With no hope and a presently intensely warped sense of ethics, Harry uses occlumency to find out what Slughorn knows about Voldemort. This is something Harry would never have done prior to this, to completely disregard someone's right to privacy by consciously invading their mind to discover their secrets. But Harry is thinking less and less like Harry right now. When the vision ends, the shot holds on Tom Riddle's face as it slowly fades into Harry's. Slughorn looks at him with a sense of shock and betrayal, realizing what has just happened. Harry assures Slughorn he's sorry, but he needed to know what he knew. Ron and Hermione are sat in the common room, having a conversation about how they're growing concern for Harry. Suddenly, he walks in, saying that Voldemort has Sirius, and they need to find him right away. Ron begins talking about how there's no real way they could know where to find him, before Hermione blurts out they should ask Cedric for help. I mean, after all, he won the Triwizard Tournament and is clearly very capable. Ron, expressing his jealousy at her enthusiasm for Cedric, says winning the Triwizard Tournament isn't that impressive, and Hermione probably couldn't even name any of the other winners. Hermione pauses for a minute and then says to herself, Marvolo Gaunt. Harry is confused for a moment and asks what she's talking about. Hermione looks at Harry and repeats herself. Marvolo Gaunt, Tom Riddle's grandfather, he was a Triwizard champion. With this, they rush off to the room of requirement. As they move quickly, Hermione and Ron both ask where they're going and why. Harry explains that he thinks the cup could be a Horcrux. He elaborates on what that means before explaining it would have to be a very powerful magic item of specific significance to Voldemort, and the cup would perfectly line up with that. Ron points out that even if this is true, the cup won't help them find Voldemort. Harry recognizes this but says that it should at least slow him down, as destroying it would do damage to his soul. Ron asks how exactly would they destroy it. Harry casts one of the more powerful spells he's learned from his year of studying the spellbook, and while it sends jewels flying, it doesn't damage the cup itself. Harry looks frustrated and goes to strike the cup again, but Hermione stays his hand and says, "Wait, it's not the cup." She directs their gaze to the jewels strewn across the floor. One of them has broken into pieces as if it wasn't made of any precious stone at all, but just glass, and within it lies the Resurrection Stone. Harry walks towards the stone to pick it up and looks around to see that suddenly he is no longer in the Room of Requirement. He's in a derelict and abandoned graveyard. He's then incapacitated and captured by Peter Pettigrew, and through dark magic, Voldemort is resurrected, this time made all the more plausible with the presence of the literal Resurrection Stone. Voldemort says that the stone was made a portkey to return to the grave of its previous owner. For years he's been trying to get his hands on the stone, but never able to, and not wanting to make his efforts too obvious or else people would realise its importance to him. When his connection to Harry became more intense with the presence of a Horcrux in the school, he realised he'd be able to influence Harry to eventually discover the truth of what was in the cup and bring it back to him. Harry struggles as Voldemort moves in for the kill. Then Harry says there's just one problem for Voldemort. Voldemort pauses and asks what on earth could be his problem. "I don't just have a connection with you," says Harry. Voldemort turns around to see Snape poised to confront him. As the Death Eaters engage Snape, more members of the Order of the Phoenix show up to rescue him. If you're wondering about the timing here, the resurrection ceremony would be implied to take a few hours, which would have given Harry enough time to reach out to Snape, and Snape to zero in on Harry's location and get the Order to race there in time. Harry is able to wrestle free and run off as Snape follows to protect him, but they find themselves cornered as several Death Eaters advance to kill them. At this moment, Snape bellows out a commanding Sectum Sempra. The spell is more powerful than Harry has ever seen and shreds the large group of Death Eaters as it destroys much of the room. Harry suddenly realizes that Snape is the person from whom he's been learning all these powerful magical skills. Unfortunately, while Snape's magic is powerful, Voldemort then appears and reveals his magic is even more powerful, as he is able to parry Snape's attacks and disarm him. Harry uses his own wand to fire a barrage of spells he's learned from Snape's book in order to hold Voldemort back, but unsurprisingly Harry is also effortlessly disarmed. Voldemort then commands Nagini to kill, and the snake lunges forward and bites Snape in the neck, mortally wounding him. At this point, while the battle still rages on, Dumbledore finally makes an appearance and we get the same fight from the end of the original film. And Voldemort is eventually defeated and forced to retreat along with his Death Eaters, and Harry has just enough time to crawl to Snape's side as he dies. Harry screams at Dumbledore to do something to save Snape, but Snape reminds Harry he knows about poison well enough to know there's no way to save him. He simply assures Harry that he's going to see James now, to tell him how proud he should be of his son. I'll be honest, I don't like the way Snape is handled at the end of the Harry Potter series. Firstly, because the whole obsession with Lily thing is kind of weird, so that's why he doesn't mention Harry having the same eyes as his mother in my rewrite. But more to the point, originally the twist with Snape in the first film is that he's kind of a mean guy, so we think he's the big villain of the film, but it turns out you can actually be a bit mean and abrasive without actually being an evil person who wants an 11-year-old boy to die. Which is a pretty good twist and a great rejection of the trope in a lot of media, where evil is very one-dimensional, and if anyone has any negative traits or is portrayed in an unsympathetic light, that must mean they're a mass-murdering psychopath. After this, we get no additional information about Snape, except for discovering in the Goblet of Fire he used to be a Death Eater, and then in Phoenix finding out he was once bullied by Harry's dad. But in The Half-Blood Prince, Snape is still a Death Eater, and the movie ends with him killing Dumbledore, which, okay, doesn't that just undo the big twist of the first movie? The guy whose whole big interesting character moment was that despite seeming like a grumpy guy, he's not evil. Turns out he actually is evil. And then in the next film, it turns out actually Dumbledore was going to die anyway, so he planned for Snape to kill him in order to get Voldemort's trust, but then Voldemort just kills him anyway, because Snape killed the previous Master of the Elder Wand, meaning now Voldemort has to kill him to become the Master. And then, before he dies, he reveals that while he hated Harry due to Harry reminding him of his father, Harry also reminds him of Lily Potter, who Snape had a weird, creepy, unrequited obsession with. Also, we find out that the whole reason he and Dumbledore had been keeping Harry alive is because they wanted him to die fighting Voldemort. To be honest, all of this just feels like the story trying desperately to be smart by just adding unnecessary layers of complexity. The first film was smart, and it was smart in part because of how simple it was. The 6th and 7th film in combination are more complicated, but they come across as more stupid. Oh, Snape killed Dumbledore, but it turns out that's because Dumbledore was going to die anyway and it was all a super secret plan. Okay, well done. Anyone can make a twist by just deciding everything that happens is part of a super secret plan. That's not good writing. So in my version, Snape is just a good guy. He's a good guy who, yeah, kind of holds a grudge against the son of the kid at school who traumatized him and made his time at school a living hell, but ultimately, that resentment would never extend to wishing ill on anyone. Indeed, on the contrary, Snape's final words suggest not only that he's recognized Harry is a different man from his father, but that he's also forgiven Harry's father and looks forward to an afterlife where he can say positive things to him. They hold a funeral for Snape at Grimmauld Place as Harry talks to Sirius. He expresses his sadness about what he learned about his father's past, but Sirius points out if there's one thing he learned from Snape, it's that someone isn't defined by their darkest moments. Sirius assures Harry that James matured and came to regret the way he behaved at school. After all, we always have the power to decide who we're going to be. Sirius means this as a word of assurance, but it leaves Harry troubled as he considers what kind of person he's becoming. We close with Voldemort talking to Pettigrew. He wishes to know why he can't just resurrect all the dead Death Eaters, but Pettigrew explains that the Resurrection Stone is ancient magic and it will take much study to fully unlock. After all, he could only bring Voldemort back because a bit of his soul was tied up with the Horcruxes. Without those, he could be destroyed forever. Voldemort expresses willingness to offer Pettigrew some leeway and time to complete his studies. After all, he was such a loyal servant, selling out his close friends Lily and James Potter, giving up their names and locations, knowing they would die. At this point, Nagini lunges towards Pettigrew, but Voldemort grabs the snake as if knowing it was about to strike. He looks into the snake's eyes as we look back with the same POV shot from when Arthur Weasley was attacked. "Nice try, Potter," Voldemort says to the snake. Harry sits there with his eyes closed before opening them to reveal the eyes of a snake. Yep, that's how we're ending this one. Harry just tried to use his occlumency to control Nagini and murder someone in cold blood, because that connection between Harry Potter and Voldemort is key, and it becomes more intense when we see more of the behaviour of Voldemort in Harry's actions. This is going to serve narratively as the low point for the series. Don't worry, he's not going to get worse than the things we've seen him do here. But it's important that he has stuff to overcome in the next film, not just a resurgent Voldemort, but also his own internal issues. I hope you're as excited to view the next part as I am to make it, because I can honestly say exploring where this story will go next and how elements from the original stories will be incorporated into the final conclusion is going to be a lot of fun for me to work out. Until then, do the algorithm stuff to help me out and make sure to click this video because YouTube thinks you'll like it, and if you click it, that does more than anything else to tell YouTube you like my content.